All right, let me just say it. Apple has, I guess, officially missed the deadline to complete the Apple Silicon transition. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're going to want to stick around and listen. So basically, we were expecting some new Macs to come in at the end of November. There's been a lot of reports about a potential November event with press release products dropping with the same way that they did recently with these recent iPads, right? Apple issued a press release. All of a sudden you wake up and there's a new iPad and a new iPad Pro and even a new Apple TV. And it's like, okay, new Apple products without an event. And we were expecting the same thing for this November time period with new versions of the M2 Max. And it looks like, based on a recent report from Mark Gurman and Apple's own comments on their earnings call, basically where they said that the product line for 2022 is set, meaning no new products are coming, that, yeah, it looks like these new Macs that we were expecting initially to come out in November, it's not happening anymore. There is no secret November event. There's not going to be any November press releases. And what Apple is selling right now, that's what they're selling for the rest of 2022. So no updated 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro, no new Mac Mini, and maybe more importantly, no Mac Pro, which means if you take Apple at their own word, when they announced the Apple Silicon transition all the way back in 2020, they said that their goal was to complete this transition in a 2-year time frame. Now, based on who you ask, that 2-year time frame started at different points. Apple announced this at WWDC in June of 2020, and some people said the transition started then. Like that was the 2-year cutoff date. Well, obviously, that came and went, and then people started pushing the goalpost to, well, they actually released their first Apple Silicon Macs in November of 2020, so that is the mark of this kind of 2-year transitional period. Well, if we're not getting new Macs in November, that means in a way that Apple has kind of failed at delivering the entire Mac lineup for that November 2-year time frame. Now, we can look at it overall and say that Apple has done a pretty good job updating their Apple Silicon lineup. I mean, they've pretty much hit every single Mac in this lineup and even given us a new option with the new Mac Studio, a computer that really didn't exist in their lineup before. So, you know, if you look at it nicely, they have done a good job updating these Macs to Apple Silicon, and most of these Apple Silicon Macs have turned out to be just really, really good computers. But, you know, you kind of have to ding them a little bit in a way because we were expecting a Mac Pro to be announced by this time frame. Like, it is really strange when you consider that when Apple announced the Mac Studio back at their event in the spring, they basically came out and said, hey, we have one more Mac left in the lineup to complete this transition.
Making our transition nearly complete with just one more product to go. Mac Pro.
Almost like they pre-announced the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, basically confirming they were working on it and that the Mac Studio did not replace the Mac Pro. So yes, it's not like you can go, oh, the Mac Studio is a replacement for the Mac Pro. They came out and said it right in their event that yes, the Mac Pro is the final computer that we have to transition over, and at least to them inside of Apple, that is their metric for completing this Apple Silicon lineup. So yes, Apple did not meet this 2-year time frame. It looks like it's going to take 2 years and some months. And is that being overly harsh to them? Maybe, but it is just something interesting to think about, considering Apple usually is pretty good on their time frame. They usually over-deliver on these kinds of things, and they just didn't do it this time. So where are these M2 Macs is probably what you're wondering next. Like, why aren't they being announced in November? And are they coming out soon? Well, to answer the first question of why they aren't out in November, I think it all has to do with supply chain issues. It's been the front page story on so many of these products recently, where Apple is just having a lot of issues in the supply chain right now with chip shortages, with component shortages, that even when you look at products like the recently updated M2 iPad Pro, there's a lot of speculation that maybe this isn't the iPad that they wanted to release. They were hoping to have a more substantial update for this M2 iPad Pro, and that just didn't substantiate because component shortages, chip shortages, even display part shortages for other parts of the iPad, what they wanted to probably ship didn't materialize. And we've just heard that, you know, again and again and again. So it's kind of the same story here. Maybe Apple just didn't have enough chips ready for the Macs that were supposed to be out in November, or maybe they were even waiting on developing even more advanced chips for products like the Mac Pro, again, that just weren't complete in this time frame. So that's why I think that these Macs are delayed. Maybe some of the Macs were ready. Maybe strategically they want to announce all of these Macs at the same time, and I get that. Because it's not like you want to introduce the M2 Pro chip inside of something like a Mac Mini when your 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro products aren't ready to go, because those are the top sellers. So when can we expect these new Macs? Well, I guess the way you could look at it on the bright side of it is that if you really were wanting to buy an M2 Mac, is that you don't have to wait a substantial amount of time before you see these products. Like, they aren't going to be here in the fourth quarter. They're not going to be here for the rest of 2022. But according to rumors, they are going to ship within the first quarter of 2023. So January and February usually aren't good times to launch products. You know, it's right after the holidays. I think Apple really did want to sell these during the holidays because that's when you just get a lot of sales. And they even predicted that this year that Mac sales were going to be down. They kind of warned investors that Mac sales were going to be down, I guess because they didn't have these new Macs ready. But January and February, usually a bad time to sell a new product. So I think the earliest we can expect these Macs, and this is what Mark Gurman seems to think as well, is for March. And yes, it seems like usually every year Apple has some sort of kind of early spring event where it's either in March or April. So March is looking like the date where we can expect new computers like the M2 Mac Mini, the 14 and 16-inch M2 MacBook Pro, and even Gurman is saying that this is Apple's plans to finally showcase this M2 Mac Pro and to complete the Apple Silicon transition. Now, I've talked a lot about these M2 computers before, but it does sound like maybe this might actually be a more substantial update, at least in the chip department, than we initially thought. So I think the last video I did on the M2 Macs, I was saying maybe expect a pared down spec bump with this M2 chip, maybe only expect the same amount of core count on the M2 Pro and M2 Max for the CPU side as we had on the M1 Pro and M1 Max. But it looks like recent information is kind of contradicting that, saying that for the M2 Pro and M2 Max chip, instead of the max of a 10-core CPU, well, Apple's actually going to bump that all the way up to a 12-core CPU, and that is going to possibly be with as much as 10 performance cores, which means that we will see an even more substantial update in multi-core performance than we got with just kind of like the multi-core bump on the M2 chip itself. So having more of these M2 cores inside of this new M2 Pro and M2 Max chip should lead to even better performance than we were initially expecting. Obviously, the GPU core counts seemingly is staying the same. So on the M2 Pro chip, we can expect around like a 20-core GPU. And then on that M2 Max chip, it's going to go all the way up to a 40-core GPU as opposed to the 32 Max GPU core that we have on the M1 Max. But that's kind of it for those updates, right? Like, they are, even though they're going to be better because they're going to have more power, they are spec bump updates. Don't expect a new design on the 14 and 16-inch M2 MacBook Pros. It's going to stay the same. The feature set is probably going to stay the same. Really, we're just expecting a power boost here, and maybe like certain specs like memory configurations might be higher. The same thing for the Mac Mini, right? We are expecting, again, a pretty simple spec bump, this time replacing the M1 chip with an M2 chip, and then an even higher end version of the Mac Mini, which is going to replace that space gray Intel Mac Mini, and that is rumored to go all the way up to an M2 Pro chip. So again, these are going to be probably pretty good budget machines. And then I guess the most exciting part of this new update for March is just going to be the Mac Pro, because it's an entirely new computer. It's their highest end for the desktop. They got a lot of room to fit in components in there, and we're still waiting to see if Apple's actually going to ship like swappable parts in that machine. Like, can you actually replace the RAM or the storage, or dare I say maybe even put in like an external, or like a, not an external, but like a third-party GPU into that Mac Pro chassis. So there's a lot of open questions about that desktop Mac Pro. But I guess what isn't really a question is the M2 Ultra and the M2 Extreme chip, which are supposed to be some pretty powerful CPUs and GPUs going into this desktop Mac Pro. So the M2 Extreme could feature like a 48-core CPU and as many as 160 GPU cores and up to 384 gigabytes of unified memory. But yeah, we've discussed all this before, but that's basically what we can expect for now, I guess, this rumored March event that Apple is going to have. But there's, I guess, another question I want to address to the viewers watching this right now is, there's probably a lot of people who are planning to buy a Mac this holiday season. And if you've been reading the rumors, watching the videos, you were maybe planning to buy one of these updated M2 Macs. And maybe this shift in strategy has you kind of upset because maybe you don't know what to do at this point. Maybe you really need this Mac for work or school, and you're kind of questioning, like, is it a good time to buy a Mac when we aren't getting new Macs in November, and then you have to wait maybe a couple months before you can purchase one? And I just gotta say, it might not be like the ideal time to buy a Mac, depending on which configuration you're going for. Obviously, if you're going for something like that new M2 MacBook Air, it just got updated, so it's a good time to buy. Don't expect like an M3 MacBook Air to come out in the first quarter of 2023. That's not gonna happen. So if you're in the market for like a MacBook Air, the refreshed M2 one, or even that M1 MacBook Air at a lower price point, those are still good options. Obviously, this 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro are getting a little bit long in the tooth now, but they're still really good laptops. I still use my 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro, and it is still just flying through almost everything I do. So it still has a lot of power, still has great battery efficiency, and an amazing mini LED display. It's just a great computer from a hardware standpoint. The thing I would say though, if you are in the market for something like this 14 or 16-inch MacBook Pro, or this like an older computer like an M1 Mac Mini, my advice to you is if you really need it now, if you can't wait till March, it could potentially be a good time to buy it. Don't forget, we're coming into peak holiday season, and you're going to see a lot of deals. I've seen the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro go on sale for as low as like $1,700, and that is a pretty good deal. It's like when these new M2 MacBook Pros come out, they're gonna be full price for a while. So my line of thinking is that if you're going to settle for one of these older Macs, they're still great laptops. I don't think we should be like upset about it. Again, it's really only going to be a spec bump on these new M2 versions. If you can find a really good price going into this holiday season for something like Black Friday, and you really think it's a good price point, I'd say get it. Or if you can get like a refurbished model or something like that. Like, again, I just want to say, they're still good laptops. It might not be the newest thing, but if you really needed one before the end of this year, now is your time to be a bargain shopper and look for some really good deals. So if there's any good deals, I'll leave some links in the description down below to maybe help you out. But yeah, that's basically the video. No new Macs until 2023. So hopefully this video helped you out in your purchasing strategy. If it did, please give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. Again, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I had to give you guys an update. And as always, thank you so much for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care, everyone.